curious theme that arises out of our studies on Judah. And we've spent some time, of course, considering how the Reformation, the conversion of Judah, led to great things. And while, of course, Judah's name is not always the first in the list, and I'm going to show you something interesting tomorrow about that, his name is not always the first in the list of the sons of Jacob. Whenever there is a matter of importance in the divine scheme, whenever there's something that's critical to God's unfolding purpose, Judah is always first. And we're going to see that again here this morning. I'd like you to come with me to the First of Chronicles, please. We're going to start here in the First of Chronicles and just have a very brief review of the content of the early chapters of this book, which we believe was written by Ezra when he compiled the Old Testament as the Jews knew it. And Chronicles, the first and second of Chronicles, ended up being the last books of the Hebrew Bible as it was compiled by Ezra. And that's why, of course, there are some things in Chronicles that don't always seem to absolutely mesh with the other historical records, but there's absolutely no inconsistency when you look at it. In 1 Chronicles chapter 1, we have, in the first chapter, the genealogy that takes us from Adam to Edom, which I find interesting, because Edom, of course, is from Adam. Adam to Adam, you might say, in 1 Chronicles chapter 1. In chapter 2 of Chronicles, verses 1 and 2, you have the sons of Israel. And of course, Judah's not the first name. They're listed not necessarily in the order of birth, because the 6 sons of Leah are put up front, which he does, of course, in Genesis 49. In verse 3, we have the sons of Judah and their fate. And of course, it speaks about and Onan, etc. And then from verse 4 onwards to the end of the chapter, we have reference to the sons of Tamar by Judah. So we have the lines of Pharez and Zara. In chapter 3 of Chronicles, we have the sons of the line of David. And that goes through to the end of that chapter. We come to chapter 4 and up to verse 23, we have the posterity of Judah. And you're getting a bit of a feel for this. So who's first? Who do you think is first in the scheme of things? When Yahweh comes to speak of the genealogies of his people, he starts with Adam, but when you get to the history of Israel, Judah is first. And there are good reasons for that, as we've seen. And so in chapter 5, verse 1 of Chronicles, you read that Reuben forfeited the right of the firstborn, which, at least the double portion element, was given to Joseph. But who's first? Well, verse 2 tells you who is first. For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler, or the prince, as the margin has it, but the birthright, the double portion, was Joseph's. So it's pretty clear, isn't it, where Judah sits in the scheme of things, in the divine hierarchy of importance when it comes to the matters that concern the family of Jacob, the nation of Israel. I want you to come to 1 Chronicles 4 and verse 14, because this is going to be the basis of our consideration this morning. We're going to spend a little bit of time here in 1 Chronicles chapter 4. Now, I think I can probably speak on behalf of many when I say that when we come to the first of Chronicles, especially the first 15 or so chapters in our daily readings, that we don't necessarily find it all that stimulating. It's a list of names, isn't it? Primarily a list of names. Well, as time goes on, brothers and sisters, you begin to realise that it's not there without purpose. There's a lot more than simply names in the first of Chronicles and the first half of it. It's absolutely fabulous what's here. And we're going to see just one of those things here this morning. We're going to see the element of Judah that has to do with one of the principal things for which that tribe was noted in its history, and that's craftsmanship. Is that something you've considered before? The craftsmanship of the tribe of Judah. And that's why we've titled our study based upon the words that you read here in 1 Chronicles chapter 4. So let's have a look at verse 14. It says this: And Meonothai begat Ophrah, and Seraiah begat Joab, the father of the valley of Charashim, for they were craftsmen. Now we're going to come back to that valley of Charashim a little later on, and we're going to see just how important that is. But we're going to focus initially on this word craftsman. This is the Hebrew word, as you can see on the screen, karash. Means a craftsman, an engraver, an artificer, someone who uses their hands to produce the most exquisite work, as we're going to see. And this is the word that first occurs, the use of this word karash first occurs of its 37 occurrences in the Old Testament in Exodus 28 and verse 11, where it is rendered engraving. This is the same Hebrew word. And the engraving, or the craftsmanship to which it refers on that occasion, is the names of the tribes of Israel inscribed on 2 onyx stones on the shoulder piece of the high priest's ephod. Now think about that, brothers and sisters. What might that represent? Here is the high priest of Israel. He has, of course, as you can see, the breastplate on his chest, but he has on his shoulders the names of the sons of Israel. The shoulder is a symbol for bearing responsibility, and therefore it comes to represent government in the scripture. And when you come to passages like Isaiah 9 verse 6, it eloquently speaks of that fact. It says that one of the titles of our Lord Jesus Christ is, of course, Prince of Peace. Why will there be peace? Well, because it's preceded by the words, the government shall be upon his shoulder. And the word shoulder there, by the way, is Shechem. The government shall be upon his shoulder. And Shechem means the shoulder, or in fact the neck, between the shoulders, where you bore burdens. You put a yoke, as it were, over your shoulders, and you bore the burden. Hence this word came to represent government and the receipt of responsibility, the acceptance of responsibility. And it's this element that is going to come out of our consideration this morning. It's about responding to what God has done in our lives and accepting in gratitude the responsibilities that he is prepared to lay upon us. We're going to see that coming out in our study. Now, this word craftsman that we're considering, the next 2 occurrences, the second and third occurrences in the Old Testament, are again very eloquent. And I want you to come to Exodus chapter 35, if you would. Exodus 35. And we're going to see here in Exodus 35, towards the end of the chapter, at verse 35, and again, the same message in chapter 38 of Exodus in verse 23. So this is the second and third occurrences of this word karash. We're going to see the work of Bezaleel and Aholiab, who were the principal craftsmen in the building of the tabernacle and its intricate furniture. We're going to see the principles that were involved in that, and we're going to see, in fact, who they were. But note the context, brothers and sisters. Now, I would be surprised if there aren't a few in this room who have done this little exercise. But if you want an exercise that is well worth doing, and especially with your children and with your younger people, then you can highlight a few words in Exodus 35. Can I just direct your attention to a few of them? Have a look with me at verse 5 of Exodus 35. It says, "Take ye from among you an offering unto Yahweh." So what's happening in this chapter is that the materials that were brought by Israel out of Egypt are now going to be collected from the children of Israel, who have arrived, of course, at Mount Sinai. See, they're encamped before Horeb. And the work of building the tabernacle, the design which had been given to Moses in the mountain, is about to begin. "Take ye from among you an offering unto Yahweh, whosoever is of a willing heart." And the Hebrew word for willing here is nadib. It means voluntary. It has the concept of volunteering inherent in it. And you know, I often, and I deliberately emphasise to our younger people who are facing perhaps, or could face perhaps, conscription into the armed forces, and I'm hoping that will happen. I don't believe it will, but I'm hoping that will happen, because it's the very best thing that could happen to them. to be conscripted into the armed forces of whatever country they might belong to. I went through that process in 1969, so I know what it does for you. But it won't happen, I believe. I think we'll be taken before that happens. But I impress upon them, brethren and sisters, that if there's one thing we know about our God, it is this. He wants volunteers to serve him. He is not interested in conscripts. If he has to get hold of people and say, now listen, you are going to make a contribution to the work of my ecclesia, that doesn't happen, does it? It does not happen. He wants volunteers, which is why when something has to be done, he's very pleased. And the angels will make a record of it. You know this from Malachi 3:16. The angels will make a record of it, of who puts their hand up to volunteer. But I'll tell you what there won't be a record of, perhaps, except in the negative sense. There won't be a record of people who've got to be forced into service. That's a very, very important principle. And it comes out of this chapter time and time again. Come to verse 10. And every wise-hearted among you shall come. So you see, when you've got a little bit of wisdom in your heart, you realise how important it is to be a volunteer. Have a look at verse 21. And they came, every one whose heart stirred him up, and every one whom his spirit, his attitude, whose attitude made him willing. And this word willing here is cognate with nadib of verse 5. It's nadab. It means to impel, and that is to volunteer. Have a look at verse 22. And they came, both men and women, as many as were willing-hearted. Nadib, same word as verse 5. Verse 25. And all the women that were wise-hearted did spin with their hands. Verse 26. And all the women whose heart stirred them up in wisdom spun goat's hair. Verse 29. You're getting a bit tired of this? You think this is necessary? Do we really need to be told this many times? Yes, we do, because volunteering is not a natural tendency of human nature. True? So it's there over and over again. Verse 29. And the children of Israel brought a willing offering, nadibah. You know what that word means? Spontaneous. They brought a spontaneous offering unto Yahweh, every man and woman whose heart made them willing. Chapter 36 and verse 1. Then wrought Bezaleel and Aholiab. Oh, here they are. And every wise-hearted man in whom Yahweh put wisdom and understanding. Verse 2. And Moses called Bezaleel and Aholiab, and every wise-hearted man in whose heart Yahweh had put wisdom. Then every one whose heart stirred him up to come unto the work to do it. You see how often this appears? Well, guess what, brothers and sisters and young people? Opportunity came to an end. Have a look at verses 5 to 7 of Exodus 36. Verse 5 says, And they spake unto Moses, saying, The people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which Yahweh commanded to make. Wouldn't that be terrific in ecclesial life? Wouldn't that be a terrific thing to happen in your ecclesias here in Canada or anywhere else? That when something had to be done or things had to be given to the work of the truth, in a very short time you had far too many offers and far too much stuff. And you had to say, look, brothers and sisters, that's enough, please. Hold fire for a while, please. Wouldn't that be terrific? That happens in your ecclesia, of course. Of course. We are short on volunteers in our community. I'm not speaking of here. I see it here. I see a lot of it here. I don't see it everywhere, and neither do you. There's a great lesson in this. We're going to see how important it is to Judah in a moment. We're going to see how important it is to Yahweh when he comes to build his dwelling place in Israel. That's the spirit he wants, and that's the spirit he uses, as we shall see. But let's read on. Verse 6 of Exodus 36. And Moses gave commandment, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, let neither man nor woman make any more work for the offering of the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing. For the stuff they had was sufficient for all the work to make it, and too much. And that's about to happen to you and me. Because when the angels come knocking on my door, as they'll come knocking on your door, the proclamation will be made. Time is up. Opportunity for volunteering and for giving is over. It's finished. It's about to be proclaimed. Brothers and sisters, if I am reading the signs correctly, I may not be reading them correctly, but I think I am. And I think you know that the time is nearly up for volunteering. That's the great lesson that comes out of our considerations here today. Let's come to Bezaleel. Exodus 35 and verse 30. So who is he? Well, his name means in the shadow, with the idea of being under the protection of God. Remember how Boaz said to Ruth, under whose wings thou art come to trust? She was a believer in the God of Israel. Her hope was centred upon what the ark represented. Yeah, so this man is under the protection or shadow of God. He's the son of Uri, we read in this verse, who is the son of Hur. Now, we're going to talk about Hur tomorrow, God willing. I don't mean H-E-R, I mean H-U-R. And talk about this important man in Judah called Hur. Strong says that his name means white linen. There are variations to that if you look up the lexicons, but I think, as you're going to see as we proceed, that white linen is correct. You're going to see continual reference to that in this matter of not only what we're considering today, but tomorrow as well. White linen. What does that represent, brothers and sisters? Well, we know from Revelation 19, verse 8, what that represents. For the fine linen, pure and white, is the righteousnesses, plural. It doesn't mean righteousness. It means the righteousnesses of the saints. Now, what do you think that means? It means what they produced in life. That's what it means. What they developed, built, manufactured, so to speak, by their craftsmanship in spiritual things. That's what that means. That's why the apocalypse ends with the words, behold, I come quickly to give every man according as his work shall be. Christ is coming to have a look at what we've done or not done. He will want to find craftsmen amongst his people. We want to talk about that this morning. He's of the tribe of Judah, it says in Exodus chapter 35 and verse 30. Is that a surprise to you? That Bezaleel, the man that Yahweh chooses to build all the intricate work of the tabernacle, its hangings, its veil, all of the furniture, the beauty of the ark, all of those things, God chose this man. Out of all of Israel, he is of the tribe of Judah. Judah's first. Judah is first. Why is Judah first? Well, because you see, the characteristic of Bezaleel was the characteristic of his reformed father, his forefather, Judah, who served Yahweh after conversion with a willing heart. That's what. So what do? Verse 31. And he hath filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding, in knowledge and all manner of workmanship, and to devise curious works, to work in gold and in silver and in brass, And it goes on like that. Filled him with the Spirit of God. Sounds a bit like the language that is used of our Lord Jesus Christ in Isaiah 11, verse 2. Workmanship, what kind of workmanship is it? Well, this word happens to be used, by the way, in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 and verse 23, to which we'll return a little later. He's going to devise, cheshab. It means to think or plan, to calculate. This word is used throughout the Old Testament. It's rendered in Malachi 3 verse 16. Those that thought, cheshab, those that thought upon his name. In other words, people who, like Bezaleel, tried as best they could to work intricately, to weave into their lives, into the fabric of their lives, the principles of God, the characteristics of God. They thought about it. They had to put a little bit of thought into it. That's recorded in the book, we are told in Malachi 3:16. And it will be brought out at the judgment seat. The very fact that we're here at this Bible school, we're here because we're interested in the Word of God and we're interested in being with those of like precious faith, has got the angels writing furiously at night when you and I go to bed. You know that, brothers and sisters? We are told that they return to the Father and they make the record which they will use at the time of our judgment. And when that angel comes into the tent, he's going to have a scroll, I believe, a literal scroll. And in that scroll is going to be recorded a lot of things, hopefully all positive. And the positive things will include the fact that this man or this woman or this young person, when they had the opportunity to confer and to be with those of like precious faith, and they spake often one to another of the things that they loved, and they thought upon these things. In other words, they thought, now listen, I'm not going to waste Watching Lake Bible School. I'm not going to be stupid and simply walk out of here and have no impact from this Bible school on the way I live my life in the future. I'm simply not going to do that. I'm going to go away from this Bible school and say, that's what I learned about where I have a weakness or a failure or a deficiency. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to do something about that. Or if I had a problem that is a stumbling block to me, I'm going to make sure that I work on that one. That goes in the record. Because here are people who are trying to weave, as this word has the idea. They are thinking through how they can make these things a part of their life. Just like Bezaleel wove all the beauty into the hangings of the tabernacle and used their instruments to intricately work the fine detail of all of the artefacts and the furniture of the tabernacle. See the point of this? When it says curious works here, it's the word, as you can see, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. You need Roger, I think. It means thought, device, plan, purpose. So Rotherham translates this phrase using the word chashab, and this word here, he translates the phrase to devise skillful designs. You know, it's not saying that when they got the pattern of the tabernacle from Moses, it had been given to him by God, and they were told, you make it exactly as you have seen it, that Bezaleel and Aholiab and others that were involved simply sat there like people doing, like sisters doing knitting, you know. Second nature sort of stuff, isn't it? It's not that, brothers and sisters. It's careful thought. It's skillful designs. You've got to use your grey matter. You've got to think. All right? That's what it's saying. But he didn't have just the task of building those things. In another task, look at verse 34. And he hath put in his heart that he may teach, both he and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. So who is this Aholiab? Well, his name just happens to mean father's tent. And what's he doing? Well, he's building the tabernacle. He's building his father's tent, isn't he? And he's the son of this chap, whose name means my brother is support. So who is his brother in this task? The wise-hearted, willing-hearted Bezaleel, who was of the tribe of Judah. And in this matter, brothers and sisters, Judah was first. For all manner of work, it says in verse 35, every sort of work. They were cunning workmen. Here's our word chashab again. And what were they doing, amongst other things? Well, it says in this verse 35, that amongst the things that they were working on was scarlet. Tola Shani. Guess where you first met the word Shani? Genesis 38. The scarlet cord was placed on the hand of Zerah. And then you read in that verse of fine linen, the meaning of the name Hur, who just happens to be the grandfather of Bezaleel. So come back with me, if you wouldn't mind, to 1 Chronicles 4. So whatever happened to Sheila? I always giggle when I say that name, because in Australia, a Sheila is a lady of some dubious qualities. And if you go into an Outback restaurant in America, the facilities are named, at least the female facilities, are named after Sheila, using the Australian word. But like most things Australian, it's nonsense. Anyway, what happened to Sheila? We read of what happened to him in 1 Chronicles 4, verse 21. The sons of Sheila, the son of Judah, were Excuse me. Did you read that with me? That was the name of his slain older brother in Genesis 38. And Tamar should have been given to this man Shelah to raise up seed for his brother. And if he had done that and had a son by Tamar, guess what his name would have been? But that didn't happen. So when he married someone else, the firstborn was named I think that's telling you something about Sheila, isn't it? Yeah. He's meeting his responsibilities. If he can't do it through Tamar, he's going to do it another way. Meeting his responsibilities. And he's the father of Lekah and Laadah, the father of Marishah, and the families of the house of them that wrought. Oh, what are they producing? Fine linen of the house of Ashbia. And Joachim and the men of Jozeba. And Joash and Saraph, who had the dominion in Moab, and Jashu Bilahim. And these are ancient things. What's happening? These were the potters and those that dwelt among plants and hedges. There they dwelt with the king for his work. So what is this all about? The house of Shelah, the third and only surviving son of Judah via his Canaanitish wife. Well, Shelah's name means petition. He was the youngest son of Judah, promised but not given to Tamar, as we've learnt from Genesis 38, verse 11, but named his first son His mother was indeed a Canaanite woman. When we read of fine linen in this verse, the word here means exactly that, white linen. Ashbia, the name that occurs at the end of verse 21, means, I shall make to swear. So here we've got a man who seems to have gone a different way than his father, who may have watched his father's conversion and followed the pattern. made petitions to Yahweh, met his obligations, and developed this house of Ashbia. People who swore allegiance to their God, swore allegiance that they would be there for the king's work. And what were they? Well, we're going to find in a moment they were potters. When it says these were ancient things, the RSV says now the records are ancient. Rotherham says, but the records are ancient. Why would that be there, do you think? Because the roots are back in the conversion of Judah. What's happening here comes from his conversion. The attitude of these people was framed by what they saw happen to their forefather and the reasons why he was put first in that family. And because the family of Judah was put first, that it had the authority, his successors saw their obligations and sought to meet them. These were ancient things. What does this term potters mean? Well, the Hebrew word yatsar means to form or to fashion or to frame. It occurs 62 times in the Old Testament, and the first three occurrences of that Hebrew word just happen to be in Genesis 2 verse 7, verse 8 and verse 19, when the angels took the dust of the earth and formed man thereof. It was the first time you read of the work of a potter, wasn't it? First time. And here are the angels of God, like a potter, framing the dust of the earth, made clay, and just like a potter, they're framing the form of the first man. That's the first three occurrences. Rotherham says they were the potters and the inhabitants of Netaim, meaning among plants, and Gadira, which means hedges, or a sheepfold formed by a hedge. And it says, of course, at the end of verse 23, that they were there with the king for his work. As Rotherham puts it, with the king in his work dwelt they there. So, brothers and sisters, I don't think I really need to spell this out, do I? We are all building in the house of God. We are preparing a habitation for deity. We are described as a community as the temple or a temple of living God. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. And 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 to 16. The community is described as a temple of living God. You'll notice I've dropped out the articles because they're not there in the Greek. We're also described individually in 1 Corinthians 6 as a temple. Your body is the temple of the living God, a habitation of mighty ones, as Brother Thomas explains 1 Timothy 3 verse 15, so that God might walk about in us. So what does that mean in literal terms? What does that mean? It means that what he wants to see in us is the working, the intricate working into our lives of that which is not natural to us, that which comes from him, his principles, his way of thinking, his characteristics. He wants to see people who, like Bezaleel, are skilled, who have been made wise of heart by the word of God, and intricately weave, step by step, little by little, the divine characteristics into the way they live their lives. That's pretty simple, isn't it? And when you're doing that, you're not just creating a habitation for deity, that he might walk about in them, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14. You're also shaping vessels for the house of God. We're actually potters, aren't we? In a very real sense, we're potters. And Paul says this to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 20 and 21. But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, gold, tried faith, silver, redemption, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honour, and some to dishonour. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he means the vessels of dishonour, in other words, not be like them, he shall be a vessel unto honour, sanctified, and meet for the master's use. For the master's use? Yeah, these people were there, it says, for they dwelt with the king for his work. It's for the master's use, prepared unto every good work. But the vessels that are being created, brothers and sisters, have a destiny, don't they? Paul suggests that. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 to 15, we read this. Now, if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire of judgment shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, ever lost a vessel that you've been trying to shape? He shall suffer loss. There'll be sorrow and grief. But he himself shall be saved, but only by passing through the fire of judgment. We're all going to be tested for what kind of vessels we are. All of this comes from what happened to God shaping Judah. And it wasn't comfortable for him, was it? But he was shaped. And what came forth, brothers and sisters, in Judah was such an intricate character that God could say, he's the pattern of my son. And I'm going to bring my son from his loins. Come back to 1 Chronicles 4 with me. You might still be there. Because there's something else here that we need to consider. Verse 13 and 14 says this. And the sons of Kenaz, well, we were here yesterday, weren't we? Othniel and Seraiah, and the sons of Othniel, Haphath. And we read verse 14, didn't we? About the valley of Cherishim. Well, we know what the name Othniel means, don't we? We know what that name Othniel means. It means the Lion of God. And he's of the tribe of Judah. And he has this son Seraiah, whose name means Yah is ruler. Yeah, Yah is ruler in Judah. Who begat Joab. Yah is father. And this man becomes the father of others. He becomes the father of a place, the valley of Cherishim, for they were craftsmen. We looked at that word craftsmen. What about this word Cherishim? Well, this valley of craftsmen, that's what it means. Cherishim means the valley of craftsmen. And it was a valley near Lydda. Now, Lydda, of course, is where they have the airport, Ben Gurion Airport in the land today. It's at Lod. Remember that? Lod? Lod is the modern name of Lydda. So this is where that valley was. It was east of Joppa. It was just beyond the Sharon. I want you to come to Acts chapter 9. In Acts chapter 9, we read in verse 32, it came to pass, as Peter passed throughout all quarters, he came down also to the saints which dwelt at Lydda. Oh, this is where this valley was, wasn't it? What does he do here? Well, he heals a man called Aeneas. And then we read this in verse 35. And all that dwelt at Lydda, and it says Saron, it means Sharon, and Sharon, of course, is the plain from the coast of the Mediterranean up to where it begins to undulate, where there are valleys. Okay, so you've got the Sharon, the Shephelah, and then the mountains. So there's a valley here which runs down towards Joppa. And the next verse says, now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, whose name means a gazelle, which by interpretation is called in the Greek Dorcas, which also means a gazelle. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did. And we know what happened. She died. She was sick and she died. And when they called Peter, who came from Lydda, where the valley of Cherishim, the valley of the craftsmen were, What do we read? In verse 39. Then Peter arose and went with them, and when he was come, they brought him into the upper chamber, and all the widows stood by him weeping, and showing the coats and garments which Dorcas made while she was with them. You can't make garments when you're dead. And no more offerings will be accepted from volunteers when the proclamation is made. You can only do it when you're alive. I wonder where she came from. She's clearly down in Joppa, because you know what Joppa was? It was a little England. It was a place of shopkeepers. It was a place of shopkeepers and trade. This is where the port was. I think she might have come from a valley just a little bit further east, where there was the remnant of a family of Judah who were craftsmen. Yeah. Let's come to Zechariah 1. You know what, brothers and sisters, it is said of Jesse, the father of David? You know what Jewish history says of Jesse? That he wove hangings for the tabernacle. Craftsmanship was evidently in the family of David. Zechariah 1. So how does this involve you and me? If we prove to be faithful craftsmen in the building of the house of God, this is where we're going to end up. Because the last occurrence of this word sharash, craftsman, in the Hebrew just happens to be in Zechariah 1 and verse 20. So that's why we're in Zechariah. And you all know the 7 night visions of Zechariah. We read the early verses of chapter 1, the man among the myrtle trees. And then we come to the second night vision of Zechariah. And of course they go on to speak about the work of Christ, the coronation of Joshua, the high priest. He becomes a king priest. The lampstand of the kingdom age, fed by Jew and Gentile. The woman in the ephah takes you back in history to the system of Catholicism that arose out of the brotherhood. And of course the 2 mountains of brass and the chariots, the 4 chariots that destroy the kingdom of men. Wonderful visions, as you well know. But this is the one that's important to you and me in the context of our study today, the second vision. The 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen. But just a word, if I might just begin the broken record again. When you come to interpret Bible prophecy, brothers and sisters, you must have this prescription. If you do not have this correct, you will not interpret Bible prophecy correctly, and some in our community don't. You've got to have this right. God uses specific names for the Jews who will be in the land at the return of Christ, and for the Jews who are outside the land at the return of Christ. And we're not talking here about the land itself. Gog comes down upon the mountains of Israel. True? When the land is involved, Israel can be used. But when it's talking about people in prophecy, Israel, the name Israel, is never used of the people in the land at the return of Christ. Check me out. I've been checking it for 25 years every day, and I'm yet to find one. But I challenge you, see if you can. The exercise will be very good for you. Israel, Ephraim, and the remnant of Jacob are the titles used by God in prophecy when talking about the people, his people, of the Jews who are scattered throughout the world at the time of the return of Christ. Judah is the name he gives to the Jews who are in the land at the time of Christ's return. Now look, I could take you to all these references. We don't need to do that. You can check that out in your own time. But just let me remind you of one. Joel chapter 3, verse 1. At that time, when I shall return again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also bring down all nations to the valley of Jehoshaphat. I thought they named the nation Israel in 1948. God doesn't name them Israel. The land's called Israel. The nation might be called Israel in the modern language. God doesn't call them Israel. He says, when I return again the captivity of Judah. That's why it says in Zechariah 12, verse 7, that Christ will save the tents of Judah first. You need to have that under your belt, because the subject matter of Zechariah 1, verses 18 to 21, is about Judah. And where are they? Well, in the land. Because you see, intertwined in this prophecy is what God is going to do for Jerusalem. He's talking about the arrival of Christ and the saints to smash the armies of Gog upon the mountains of the land of Israel, but the people that are there are called Judah. Let's have a look at it very briefly. Verse 18. Then lifted up mine eyes for this second night vision, and saw and behold 4 horns. Horn, of course, is a symbol for power. It's a reference here to the nations who have trampled God's people in history. These horns of verse 19, it says, what be these? He asked. And he answered me, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Notice the names. Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. They have scattered Jewry in their history, haven't they? And then in verse 20, Yahweh showed me 4 carpenters. Unfortunate translation. Sorry about that, Dan, but it's an unfortunate translation. It's actually a craftsman. Abba Karash. Abba, 4. Karash, craftsman. And that's how Rotherham translates it. And this is modelled upon 4 craftsmen of that time. Their names were Joshua, Yahshua, Zerubbabel, Haggai, and Zechariah. They're the 4 craftsmen here who are building what? The house of God. And we are told in Zechariah 3 verse 8 that they are men of sign, pointing forward to the work of Christ and his saints. So the 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen represent the perfect Israel of God. 4 just happens to be the biblical number for righteousness and God manifestation. And they, brothers and sisters, are formed into an army to destroy the Gentile powers at Armageddon. Verse 21, what come these to do? He said, these are the saints in glory, and they have a work to save Judah. These are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man did lift up his head, but these are come to fray them. When it says that no man did lift up his head, it's talking about the fact that heads were lowered. The history of this nation, when power after power, empire after empire came in to destroy them and to remove them, heads were lowered. But you see, verse 18 said, then lifted up mine eyes. The answer to trial, brothers and sisters, is a clear vision of the future, which is accompanied by diligent building in the house of God. But these are come, the saints are come, to do what? To cast out the horns of the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it. They caused it to tremble. And they're going to be driven in terror themselves. There will be divine vengeance that will come, and you and I will be the instruments. Do you know how you can be there? You know what the sure, absolute sure thing is to be there? Prove yourself today to be a craftsman in the house of God. Work first on yourself and then do everything in your power to frame vessels in the house of God. That's how you can be assured of being there in that day, when this land and the prophecy of Zechariah 2 verse 12 is fulfilled. And Zechariah 2 verse 12 says this, "And Yahweh shall inherit Judah, his portion, in the Holy Land, and shall choose Jerusalem again." You and I, brothers and sisters, are going to have a portion in this land. You know what it's going to be? The prince's portion is to the west of the Holy Oblation and to the east of the Holy Oblation. You know what he's going to do with that territory? He's going to give it as an inheritance to the saints. The rest of the land is given to the tribes, 7 above, 5 beneath. But this is the portion of the land that you and I will inherit. Now, why would we be there? Well, it's in the centre, it's close to the temple, and of course the northern portion of the Holy Oblation just happens to be called the portion of the sons of Zadok, righteousness. Yeah. And guess who's close by? As close as you can get to the temple of all the tribes. Judah will be the first to be saved and will be first in the order. And that's why there are 7 tribes above the Holy Oblation and 5 beneath, because 7 happens to be the Abrahamic covenant number. This is the land promised to Abraham and his seed. And do you want to get in there? How do you get there? By being a craftsman that Yahweh through his Son will look upon and say, "I see in you what I saw in Judah." Someone weaving into their life my character. You got faults. You've all got faults. I got faults. But I see that character. And I'm prepared to give you my grace. Here at the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, the land of the red-cord people, the seed of Abraham, given to them by divine grace.